Hi, Lori. Hi, Jamie. Thank you again for taking the time to join us this afternoon to talk about your run for Congress. Lori, can you start us off by telling us a little bit about who you are and why voters should vote for you?
Thank you again for having us. Was looking forward to today. I'm Lori Chavez-DeRemer. I have lived in Happy Valley for 22 years now, where I've raised my family, two beautiful girls from the age of 6. Now they're 28 and making themselves in the world. I've been married 31 years to my husband, Sean, who we met in high school. And after finishing medical school, we chose Oregon. And as well as building our business now since 2005 in the healthcare industry, where we have now approximately over 150 either CRNAs, nurse anesthetists, and or MDs who work for us, providing care throughout the state in either surgery centers, ORs, GI clinics, and health and wellness clinics over the last few years. And then, of course, I was mayor. Public service is important to me, and from 2010 to 2018, I served the city of Happy Valley as mayor. And I look forward to bringing that experience and all of the things that I have heard and learned, and then all the new things that we're facing in Oregon to Congress, and making sure that they understand who Oregon is, what's important to our state, and making sure that our voice is always on the table.
Great, thank you very much. Jamie.
Yeah, thanks again for this opportunity. My name is Jamie McLeod-Skinner. I live in Central Oregon, a small business owner. I also do emergency preparedness assistance with the state for folks dealing with the crises we're facing because of climate issues. I also serve on an Education Service District Board and serve on the OWEB, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. When I was 8, my mom told me to always leave a place better than I found it, and that's been kind of a mantra for me all my life. My mom's my great hero. When I was a kid, she was a single mom with 2 kids and worked 3 jobs to put food on our table. So she really taught me those values of hard work and family and community. I'm a proud product of Oregon Public Schools, from high school in Southern Oregon to also law school. I also have degrees in civil engineering and city and regional planning. Began my public service work over in Bosnia and Kosovo after the war, managing the reconstruction of schools and hospitals. Problem solving is what I do for a living. When I came back to the States, I've served in local office as a council member, as a vice mayor. I've worked as a city manager. I've worked as staff, as planning staff. I've worked for nonprofits and led nonprofits as well. Last year, as one example, I spent half the year down in Southern Oregon, real close to where I finished high school, helping the city of Talent get back on its feet after losing 1/3 of its homes and businesses to wildfire. So problem solving is what I do for a living. And the challenges that we're facing really are requiring that level of ability to bring people together, bridge the divides, and focus on solving problems, not getting kind of sucked up into the politics of it, but just really focused on how we work together to get the job done. Because we've got so many challenges that we're facing, from working families challenges to climate. I know we're going to be talking about a bunch of them today. And my philosophy has always been government needs to know when to help out, when to get out of the way. And I think that's an approach we need to bring to Congress. So really excited about bringing my on-the-ground experience, both in policymaking and actually getting the job done. I think voters are hungry for that kind of leadership right now, and that's why I'm excited to serve.
Great, thank you. Jamie, let's start with you on this question. Can you tell me why you believe that you're the right fit for this district?
Yeah, because I know the issues on the ground. I've actually got that on the ground experience from addressing some of the challenges that we're seeing, the climate challenges. So again, I've worked in wildfire recovery, now in emergency preparedness. I was recently in Santiam Canyon and talking to folks who, we're in different political parties. I'm a rural Democrat. I'm also proudly endorsed by the Independent Party of Oregon and Working Families Party as well. But, working with people across the aisle, because wildfire doesn't check party affiliation when it's destroying a community. And that's really my track record, just having a lot of practical experience of the challenges we're facing. I worked in economic development before, helped in talent and people rebounding from the COVID economy. That's a huge issue. worked in affordable housing. I'm actually working on an affordable housing project now. That's a huge crisis within our state that we need to deal with. On other big issues, protecting our fundamental personal freedoms and rights, absolutely committed to helping to protect our right to abortion health care. And that's a big discussion, big issue in this race, and a big contrast. And then also protecting our democracy. I've always been committed to helping us. I've literally seen that the impact of government falling apart and people turning on each other. And so that's why I've always just been so passionate about working with people, and I've got that support across the district. People are really, again, as I mentioned before, I think hungry for the kind of leadership that I show every day here in Central Oregon and really across the state, and bring people together to solve our problems. But all those practical on the ground issues. So I understand things from a policy perspective. I also know things from an on the ground perspective as well.
Thank you. And Lori, same question for you. Can you tell me why you would be the right fit for this district?
The most important issues that Oregon's facing and America's facing is the economy and inflation. I mean, it's hitting every Oregonian, young, middle-aged, seniors, across the board, with housing, with gas prices, with food costs, with labor costs, whether you're looking at it from a business perspective or an employee's perspective. And we're hearing that from everywhere on the trail. People are picking and choosing between, do I fill up my gas tank today, or do I decide that I can only eat one meal today because I have to get to work in order to get another meal, on the plate tomorrow? And that's a real big issue. And we're seeing today, the announcement that OPEC's going to cut that, the amount of barrels, 2 million barrels is going to be a real effect on our cost of gas. We already see it ticking up to $6 a gallon again. And, as we head into the winter, we're also going to be concerned with natural gas. So some of those issues are really important to all Oregonians and Americans. The other issue that we're seeing is government overreach. While we want to be partners and allies, again, I was mayor of Happy Valley. It was my job to assist businesses. It was my job to assist the community members to always get to a yes, if we can get to a yes, not be a barrier for that. And then lastly, one of the things that we're hearing that people want us to identify, which we can see with our eyes, public safety. It's been a real crisis here in Oregon, as well as America. And we saw it on the streets of Portland over the last several years. The crime rates have gone up tremendously. Homicides have gone up by 200%. I think there was 2 stabbings just this weekend in Portland. So we're seeing it on the ground. People are worried about property crimes, violent crimes. And we have to make sure that we can take those people off the streets and keep them in until they have their day in court. But the no cash bail, revolving door, defunding the police movement is again, I don't know one Democrat or Republican that I've talked to who thinks that is a good idea or even was a good idea. And I think they're recognizing it now that it's affecting our entire community. And we have to make sure that we always fund law enforcement. We are a nation of law and order, and we need to make sure that we can address those issues. And as mayor, I've done that. As a business owner, I've done that. As a mom, with kids in the school system, creating the Happy Valley Youth Council, I've done those things on the ground every single day. So, and I was elected 4 times. So I think that's a good success record. We've had an 18-year business, 150 employees we've grown to. And so we have a lot of work to do, but we need to make sure we stay in the game and at the table.
So Lori, if elected to Congress, what would you do on the public safety front to improve it?
Right. So when we have to be partners with our state as well, we're seeing it in our state, right? A mental health crisis. We're seeing drug addiction, criminal elements every single day because there's no leadership addressing those issues. From a federal level, we have to make sure that we can lean on our district attorneys to prosecute. We have to make sure that we can keep them in jail until their day in court. Even if that means increasing more funding for more police officers. We'd like to see more police officers in the street. Maybe there's accountability for where the money is spent in order to address that. So, it's a lot of issues, mental health being one of them. We have to make sure that we have wraparound services and that funding gets to that. My husband and I own and operate, mental health clinics where we serve drug-resistant depression patients. These are patients who are right on the verge of, thinking their life is not valuable anymore. And when that's out on the streets, these are our brothers, our sisters, our community members. It is not kind, and it's not the right thing to do to let them die on the streets every single day and just think it's okay to step over them. We have to get these people in housing, and but public safety is number one. We have to make sure that we have that 24/7. That's what people are expecting. And this criminal element and drug element is now affecting all communities. 15,000 homelessness on the streets of Portland and all of Oregon. That's a real problem. We have to make sure that we're there. That's a leg of the stool.
Thank you. So I just want to clarify a couple of things. Because you mentioned about kind of working with district attorneys. So as a member of Congress, would you be then, engaging with local district attorneys about what their policies are regarding holding people who've been charged with crimes?
Well, I think it's important to, again, work with the attorney generals as well in order to bring that pressure onto the district attorneys and say we need these criminals off the streets. But what I'd like to do is make sure that we have the funding for our police officers, making sure we're working directly with cities and communities to say, we'd like to put a couple 100,000 more police officers on the streets and give them bonuses, make sure that have that retention. We have it through attrition. They've been lost. People are just tired of the job and not having leadership and the support. When we saw the marches down in Portland and the burning down of the police stations and the courthouse, what kind of leadership does that tell them that one, we've hired them to do their job, and two, they can't do it anymore? So we want to make sure that there's funding for that there's incentive to be a public law enforcement officer in this country, and we'll protect you. That's what I'd like to do in Congress.
Okay, and so you're talking about federal funding for law enforcement, and if I understand correctly, also additional federal funding for mental health support?
Absolutely. I think we have to address this issue. It's a crisis across the nation.
Great, thank you. Jamie, how about you? What actions would you take if elected to Congress on public safety?
Well, if you talk to both urban police officers and rural sheriffs, the number one issue I've heard across the board, and I've spoken to countless at this point, and I've yet to have an exception to this, it is around support for mental health services, because right now we are asking too much from our officers, just like we're asking too much from our teachers. So we need to fund the type of programs that will help do that. Eugene, with their Cahoots program, has a great program. It answers about 20% of the calls, but that's a program-specific project. And there's another project similar in Portland. It's a slightly different model. So making sure, almost like with the CDBG funds, that we have targeted resources and allow the local law enforcement to figure out what's the best program for their department. But the case of the Cahoots program, when there's a 911 call that goes in, it allows an assessment to be done. And sometimes there's a partnership of police officers and mental health professionals. Sometimes one or the other shows up individually or together. We've looked at the same with EMT services and with also fire versus police services. And so having that same assessment and having funding the resources that our police officers are asking for to make sure that that job can be done, and also having the appropriate response, because otherwise we're putting our officers in a really tough situation if they're being asked to respond to a situation that they either haven't had the training for, or it's different to the tools that they have. The other piece is making sure there's funding for police services, police training, accountability, and also officer wellness. So when I served on a council, I went through a Citizens Police Academy. It was a fascinating opportunity to really learn firsthand about the experience, to see the decision-making challenges that are there, to see how you have to be right every single time. And that pressure, the pressure on families. So when I was just last year, when I was in talent, and actually the time I've been city manager and on council, I've always worked to increase the funding so we have that full spectrum of support for our officers so they can do their job. But when I went into talent last year, when I first got there was not 24/7 coverage. There was when I left, because we all need to feel safe in our communities. And when you call 911, you want someone to be able to show up and know that they have the training and resources available to address the need at hand. So providing those services, again, specific police services, but also the training. We've seen this also, as different situations come up. There's some bunch of case examples I go into, but making sure that officers have the training they need, that accountability standard. I've never heard there be a pushback on that, because there's a lot of pride in the profession about the work that's done, but also that wellness component to make sure officers are supported. Often in this discussion, we're seeing it more of an or rather than and discussion. For all of us, we need to feel safe in our homes, in our communities, in our schools. and making sure that those who are charged with that role have the resources to do it is critically important. And that's something I've worked on, throughout my public service career. Really proud to be endorsed and supported by the former chief of police in Bend because of that philosophy that I bring to this work.
Is there anything specifically that you would want to do in Congress, specifically on the accountability front?
Well, so we need to have a conversation about this, and we need people at the table who can have this conversation. And this is my reference to an and, not an or conversation. And we're starting to have those conversations now, but it's really important that as we talk about accountability, that we have police officers and we have, folks who are in rank and file as well as in leadership roles to talk about that accountability piece. I mean, this was something that came up when I was serving on a city council, and there was actually a push to move to a. There was some talk at that time about moving to a public oversight committee as a neighboring city had, and I actually was very supportive of the accountability piece still being within the department, because the public often doesn't understand the issues that come up for rank and file. So yes, we need to have a public conversation of what is that standard? How can we make our communities safe? Because there are some communities, and we saw this during the Black Lives Matter movement, where people raise concerns about feeling safe when officers showed up. And I know every officer I've ever spoken to has a tremendous level of pride in the services they provide and helping communities feel safe. So we need to have these conversations together around the same table and say, what does it look like? How do we resource it to support it so we can meet that level in standard of service and provide the training and understanding so that there is the appropriate level of service so communities do feel safe. All communities should be feeling safe. And we need to make sure there's the training and support to make that happen.
Great, thank you. Jamie, if you can start us off on this next question. Senator Graham recently introduced a bill to ban abortions after 15 weeks. Do you support that, or what is your view on that? And would you support any kind of federal legislation on abortion access?
So absolutely no to supporting the bill that Senator Graham brought forward. In terms of abortion rights, for me, it's pretty basic. Is the government should not be telling us what to do with our bodies, when to start our families, or how to make those emergency medical decisions. And this is the concept: the government needs to know when to help out, when to get out of the way. Government has no role in telling people what to do with their bodies. I mean, that's very fundamental to me. So and this is one of the distinctions in the race. I was dismayed to see Roe v. Wade overturned. I would codify Roe into law and make sure those protections are in place. And this is, this is personal for me. And I've gotten permission from my wife to tell the story. I've told it before, but she had a miscarriage at one point and was literally bleeding out. And she went in and got what is called an abortion. And had she not had access to that service, she would have died. And so making sure that we have, that we are protecting what I believe are the fundamental rights. They're part of our fundamental personal freedoms that include also access to contraception, access to marry the one you love, and also other rights that have been indicated that are on the chopping block. All those need to be protected. But right now, the fight is over whether or not a woman can make a decision about her own body. And I would absolutely stand by the right to make that decision. It's a personal decision between a woman, her doctor, and her God, or her God with input from her doctor. And I think Congress needs to codify that.
And Lori, same question for you. Senator Graham introduced a bill to ban abortions after 15 weeks, excuse me. What's your stance on that? And would you support any federal legislation on abortion?
So when Roe v. Wade the Dobbs case was overturned and brought back to states' rights, I think that that's where it should be. I will not support a national ban. I've said this over and over again. And I think, Helen, you and I probably had this conversation more than once. These labels have probably gotten a lot of us into, nonsense, because it's more nuanced than that. And my position on abortion has never changed. In the primary, I wasn't pro-life enough for the party. And now in the general, I'm not pro-choice enough. And I think that that's the nuanced part of it. I have always been and always stood by protecting the first trimester. always, as Jamie just mentioned for her wife, and sorry about that Jamie, that happened to her, in the rape, incest, and the life of the mother should always be protected. As far as, and same with criminalizing women, it's a non-starter. I've said that over and over again. So my position is mainstream, where probably most of Americans find themselves. What I don't support is the abortion up until the very last day. And I don't support taxpayer funded abortion. So that's where we differ on this issue. I'm not she wants to pin me as an extremist. That is not the case. I fall right in line with mainstream, always have. And yeah, a national ban is not, that was your first question. I would not stand for that.
And so would you, I mean, if it were federal legislation that we're banning after, let's say 26 weeks, or that, I mean, the taxpayer aspect, the state of Oregon has decided that that's, they help women who are low income and on the Oregon Health Plan get access to abortions and all other contraceptive care. But, is there any federal legislation on abortion that you would support, such as banning abortions after 26 weeks?
I don't want to see this on the floor of Congress. I think this is a state's rights. As mayor, again, I believe in local rights. I believe in states' rights. I don't want to see this on the floor of Congress. This is right back here in the state of Oregon, where it should be, and now Oregonians, and I trust them to decide. And it's protected now. And so that's something Oregonians, 4 million Oregonians, will make that decision, not 9. And I don't want to see it on the floor of Congress.
And I apologize for pressing on this, but we have heard from people in Congress. One week they say that they believe it's a states' rights issue, and then they're introducing bans into Congress. So you would oppose any effort to create a federal standard on abortion?
Yes, and that's where I differ from my party. That's why I'm not the extremist in this issue. And I've said it over and over again, and my stance has never changed in my entire life. So thank you.
Okay. Great,
Yeah.
thank you. Let's move over to another hot button issue, gun safety. And Lori, let's start with you on this. Would you support raising the minimum age for buying a military-style semi-automatic rifle to 21 years of age?
I'm a big supporter of the Second Amendment. Law-abiding citizens should not have their Second Amendment attacked by Congress. I mean, it is their right if they're law-abiding citizens. That's not what we're talking about when we see these issues with gun violence, right? Again, I have addressed this more than once on mental health is so very important. We know gun safety is important. We have the strongest laws in Oregon, very strong laws. I mean, I've purchased sidearms before, and I know I have to go through a process, and I have to have a background check, and I have to make sure that I have no issues with domestic violence involved before you can have access to that. So if we're law-abiding citizens, that's what I want to protect, is that Second Amendment.
But the 18 to 21-year-old change would actually mirror what federal law has been on handguns. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, there's been a significant amount of research in terms of, that 18 to 21 time period. Not that that's magic, but that there is that raising the age could affect, some of the incidents we're seeing. I mean, and so is that? It's arguably not restricting rights. It's actually just kind of like making uniform the age limit.
And I think that the answer that you just mentioned is that it's not the the magic wand. It might not have worked in several different situations. So what I find is that if there's a criminal element to somebody owning a gun and they've broken the law, they're not going to follow another law, right? Criminals don't follow the laws at all. Law-abiding citizens don't want to be criminalized just because of their age. They serve in the military at 18 years old. So again, addressing it just because of a 3-year difference and not really understanding the specific issues to that doesn't make sense to me right now. I think protecting our Second Amendment as adults, which is 18 in this country, should be protected.
And are there any other changes on gun legislation that you would support?
I would like to follow the laws that make sense, that are effective, that are on the books. We're not doing that. What we're seeing on the streets with gun violence are criminals who are not following the law. Should they have a gun? No, not if they have a criminal record. And so I want to see those laws enforced that are effective, that make sense, and move down that. Right now, we don't even follow those laws. So I don't think adding more to the books is going to stop the mental health and culture crisis that we're experiencing in this country, where violence in general seems to be running rampant on the streets. I would like to definitely focus on the mental health crisis again, as to why we're in this situation, and also the public safety element of it, and make sure that we can fully fund our public safety in order to address some of these issues.
Okay, thank you. And Jamie, would you support raising the minimum age for buying a military-style semi-automatic rifle from 18 to 21?
Yes, I would. And the shooting we just had here in Bend recently, that was a 20-year-old who had legally had access to his semi-automatic gun. And so had that rule been in place, and he would not have had access to that gun, it may have prevented a horrible tragedy here in Central Oregon.
Are there other gun measures that you think that the federal government should take for gun safety?
Yeah, and to be clear, this is a discussion between responsible gun ownership versus those who are not taking our community safety issues seriously. My dad hunted to put food on the table. My father-in-law grew up hunting in Eastern Oregon. And by the way, you don't use an assault weapon to hunt, not if you're actually planning on eating what you kill. But yeah, so safe storage, and also violent history checks and closing the loopholes on those. There are some in place. There are a lot that are not in place. And those have, are causing tragedy. And there's tragic stories all the time, especially around issues of domestic violence. Banning ghost guns. And that's something from law enforcement officers we've heard, because it's hard to trace. And then also addressing weapons of war. You provided one solution that I think would be a real good step to take. On the safe storage piece, when I finished high school in Southern Oregon, and I had, when I was between my junior and senior year, a bunch of us went off to basketball camp at U of O, and we got to know a team from Crater, from just up the road. Well, Crater High School. It was Central Point, and that we all got to be friends. We got to know each other. Then when school started up again, the week before our two teams were to play each other, one of the girls on that team took her own life. Her dad's handgun was out. She was struggling with depression, and without having safe storage, she had access to the gun and took her own life. And it was, and she's actually buried in Ashland. When I go back, I often stop by and just pay respects to her grave to this day. There are tragedies happening all the time based on not having some of those common sense measures in place. And responsible gun owners will tell you that they're looking for support and resources, and strongly support these simple steps to just help our communities be safer. We're seeing tragic things happen in our country that we don't have to see. And some of these common sense, small steps that our responsible gun owners agree with are the ways to move forward and just help our communities be safer.
Great, thank you.
Helen, on that note, if I might add, tonight I am attending, going to a gun club for exactly that, where they train our public safety officers in safety, but they also train our youth, and they train our young people about public safety. That's an important thing to address on the education part, and incentivizing gun owners to make sure that they understand what it is to own a weapon. It's a real responsibility if you're going to carry or own or hunt or be a sportsman. And so I think, as many times as members of Congress, we can go to these events. I think that that's important to understand the safetiness and the security and how important it is to our nation.
And would you require that for buying a gun, that someone has to have gone through such a program within the previous 5 years or something?
I would incentivize it for sure. Mandating is where I think we get lost in the weeds. There are responsible gun owners, and we can teach and we can educate by bringing our youth up to understand what that means, and incentivizing gun owners who want to take that training. That's what's key. That's being responsible in your gun ownership.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I think we start now again, actually with Jamie on this. Do you agree with Biden's plan to cancel about $400 billion in student debt? And are you concerned about the potential impact on inflation or the fairness of canceling debt for those in households earning as much as $250,000 a year?
Well, I think it was an imperfect solution to a larger problem that needs to be fixed. We need to, and I think part of the thinking there, well, there's two different things. There's Congress holding the purse string, so I think there should have been a discussion in Congress, first of all, and second of all, I do think though that part of getting our post-COVID economy back on track, we are still dealing with COVID, but the biggest impacts of COVID, trying to get things back on track. And a lot of these are the economic issues, supply chain issues, getting people back to work, getting people to lean into also investing in themselves for their future education. I've spoken to a lot of young folks, and I know a lot of young folks who are nervous about investing in themselves, whether they go into the trades or they go into wanting to pursue a college degree. We've now got this barrier that is creating a bigger divide between the socioeconomic divide. And so, I think we needed to take a step forward and start addressing it. So I appreciate that he was trying to grapple with it and move forward with it. And I think that right now they're doing some right sizing and some course corrections. But in terms of the fairness issue, we need to deal with so many aspects of helping incentivize and get people back on track. That's really key. And so if there's assistance and support in one area, we're also providing other support in other areas. Some of the other major bills that Congress passed recently, the Inflation Reduction Act, and well, even during COVID, the ARPA and some of the other programs, the infrastructure bill, those were investments in some of the other work to help us start building things again and invest in the future. So I saw this step as part of his effort to try to get people leaning back to the economy, which I think is really important. But more so, I think the bigger issue is how do we fix this and how do we get folks to invest in their future? It's part of investing in our economy. And so as the daughter of a teacher, I think the college route is important. As the granddaughter of a union machinist, I think also the building trades route is important. So doing things to support the building trades and their apprenticeship programs, CET programs in high school, actually even in pre-K programs to help invest and help provide those incentives and that support for our education system. All those things we've seen, studies have shown, we invest pennies and we get a huge savings, and then also it's a huge benefit in the long run. The other thing that I've been proposing is a civilian GI Bill, and this is for the college track, for especially professions where we're not seeing people go into the professions because they can't afford to. So, when I went through school, my mom gave me $1,000 when I graduated high school, and I had to get through to go through school myself. I took the college route. I had to do work study. I had to get grants. I had to work my way through, get scholarships, get loans. I had to put together a whole package so I could afford to go to school. And we don't have some of those resources now to provide those incentives and support. And the level of debt that so many young people are facing right now has built up a fear factor that people are not wanting to go in school. My own kids are nervous about going into school and taking on debt because there is that lack of confidence in being able to address it and have, with the economy struggling during COVID, to be able to make those long-term investments. So again, this civilian GI Bill would be something like nurses and teachers. These are shortages that are coming. Someone could sign a promissory note, sign up to go through education to get a nursing degree. They would also help with the other expenses while they got that degree. And after they got it, they could go into the field where they were needed. Often in rural areas, we're seeing the need for some of these professions. And then they would work for a period of years to pay it off. It's like a reverse student loan program. And then when they were done, they would have that education, that degree, and they would be able to go forward and would have no more, they would not incur debt. And they would also then, once they worked it off, not have to pay something back. And this is actually a takeoff on a program that I have in Eastern Oregon right now in La Grande that has with Eastern Oregon University. And it would, if you look at what that would actually cost to fund, it is pennies on the dollars in terms of the benefit for not just younger folks getting access to professions, but also filling those professions where we're seeing the pipelines dry up, and we need, our economy needs to be functional, needs people in these professions.
Thank you. Lori, if you can answer the same question, do you agree with Biden's plan to cancel $400 billion in student debt? And are you concerned about the potential impact on inflation or the fairness of the program?
Yeah, I'm not sure I followed exactly if Jamie supported it or not, only because I just really didn't understand exactly that, because I'll tell you, I think this is more reckless spending. We really are picking and deciding, and what she just said, people are afraid to go invest in themselves in college. Well, now they're paying off somebody else's debt and they haven't even gone yet. Or maybe they're out and they paid for theirs and now they're going to pay it a second time. When my husband and I came out of paying off his school debt, we were almost $400,000 in debt when we moved here 22 years ago. $400,000 in debt, and it took heartache and sacrifice and paying that off. My daughter just got a law degree. She's a public defender, and she's going to receive this $10,000 off of what she had to pay. She's going to make a fine living, and I find that's unfortunate that she's going to have access to this when there might be somebody in the trades that we're trying to elevate, and the apprenticeship programs, they're not going to have access to that same $10,000. Also, what about any of the students who've decided that they want to go into their own business, or they want to capitalize their business with a purchasing of, maybe equipment or vehicles in order to do their job? They don't have access either. So now we're putting these young people further in debt because of this reckless spending, on top of the American Rescue Plan, on top of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really not reducing inflation. We're seeing a 40-year high here. Since I was in middle school, this is the highest inflation we're ever going to see, and people are truly struggling. And now we're going to add picking $10,000 or up to 20 for some, $400 billion that we're going to ask Americans to pay. We're $31 trillion in debt in this country, 31 trillion. If you look at the population of Oregon, 1%, what is that, $300 billion? How are we ever going to pay for the future of Oregon and this country if we keep the reckless spending? We want to incentivize people to go to school. We want to make sure. Why didn't they talk about reducing the interest rate possibly instead of just writing it off? There was no discussion about that. And it's frustrating to see for other hardworking Americans who believed that, if they got a higher education, they would come out and get a better job. The reason people are afraid to invest in their future is because there's not a job waiting for them right now, and jobs are not available. We're not taking an assessment of what our communities need and identifying. I just toured Central Oregon Community College. I was, I worked on the bond at Clackamas Community College several years ago to invest in that. I was the finance chair for that, to make sure that kids, young people could have an option as opposed to a 4-year college. And what's happened is they're not sure at the end of it if that money is going to be money well spent. And I find that unfortunate if they can't find a job here in Oregon. And with all the other reckless spending that we're doing, I will tell you, we're going to be in a world of hurt, because people's paychecks, they're working 12 months and they're getting 11. And we're taking it right out. People want more money in their back pockets. People want to feed their families. And a lot of these kids who are going to school can't own a home. There's not enough of housing affordability. I mean, we're putting them in a world of hurt by this reckless spending, and we need to rein it in.
Helen, may I just follow up on one point?
Sure.
On some of the bills that were mentioned, like ARPA during the time of COVID, when people were really struggling, and I was interim city manager in Talent. We had like about $5,000 ARPA checks we were handing out, and for those small businesses, and the city had lost about a third of its businesses to the wildfire. Those $5,000 checks were the difference between those businesses staying open or closing their doors. And also, I will note, it's incredibly hypocritical to criticize programs that one has benefited from oneself, but also this sense of needing to get back on track and needing to address the economy. Post-COVID, we had an international pandemic. We've got a war going on right now in Ukraine and Russia, and it has impacted supply chain issues. COVID has impacted supply chain issues. So this leaning into the CHIPS program, getting us to invest in high tech, that's also going to be security, information security, and we're now help us to be more competitive internationally and develop an industry here and expand our industry here. That's critically important. The Inflation Reduction Act, to both address the climate crisis challenges that we're facing, as well as manufacturing. We need to, getting our economy back on track means means being able to build stuff again. And so those programs, those investments are really important. Another thing with the Inflation Reduction Act was starting to address the cost of living through starting a small start, and I'd like to see us go further on this, but bringing down prescription drug costs. And so to address our economic issues, we need to address supply chain issues. We need to start building stuff again, so we're stimulating the economy, and then also lowering that cost of living, prescription drug prices, housing, childcare, all those things that people can re-engage in the economy and get the people we need. I mean, there's solutions there with regard to potential immigration reform. So there's some of these programs that have been put in place are real investments in getting our economy going again.
Thank you. I think Grant actually has a question.
Yeah, I had a question for Lori on climate. I watched the K2 debate last week, and I just wanted to follow up on something that you said. You said the climate had been changing for thousands of years, and I wondered what you meant by that and whether you believe in man-made climate change.
Yeah, the climate has been changing for thousands and thousands of years. We can't predict when the climate's going to change. I will tell you what happened over in Florida. And my goodness, they're going to be reeling and having to rebuild and recover. That would have happened without people. But we do have a lot of people in the world, and we're talking about global emissions. We're talking about global climate change. The issue is, how do we address the problem? We can identify that there are issues in changing. It's how do we answer that issue? And that's actively managing, addressing global carbon emissions. So when we talked about the Inflation Reduction Act, the lion's share of that money is going to the Green New Deal. And that can't be just the only answer. And I know my opponent is a staunch supporter of just the Green New Deal, but there are other ways to address what we are experiencing in the world today. For instance, our natural resources. We know that timber is huge here in Oregon. It's one of our most prized natural resources, and we have to protect that. If we continue not to have access to those resources in order to thin our forests, we're going to continue to have megafires. Now, we know that megafires aren't good with the smoke, for health, for families, for pregnant women, and they're not good for the industry either, as far as being able to log or use the lands in order to graze for if you're a rancher. Those all have to be addressed. So what I mean by the Green New Deal, it cannot be the answer. I do not believe that the Green New Deal is the answer to addressing what we will always face, and that's a bigger population. We're going to see climate change, and how do we actively manage that? So isn't climate denier is nonsense. That is not me, but I think that there are other ways that we can address that. Maybe talking about energy as well. Fossil fuels, they're important. We need fossil fuels in order to access, minerals if we're going to move toward any other direction of batteries, right? We have to make sure that we can't decimate one industry to pick another, and not be able to attain the goals. If we adopt California's policy on electric vehicles by 2035, that might address a little bit of a portion of it, but right now they can't handle the electric grid. There's no way to store that. So we have to transition through some of these processes, and ending one with these deadlines or these mandatory guidelines that they say, well, now it's 2029 and then it's 2030. Who pays for all this stuff? Our economy, America's economy, can't afford it. You're talking $93 trillion, again, to address all of these things that my opponent wants to address. And we'll run out of money. We will not be able to do that because we have to use the energy to move the world, feed the world, move goods and services, protect our businesses, protect our economy. We're getting into the winter, and I worry about people's natural gas bills. What does that look like if we don't have access to that? So these are transition conversations, but it's not the one size fits all. And so the Green New Deal is not the answer to the problem. We can come up, we can be effective, and we can be, let the industry play in this and leave them at the table. They know best. We don't know best. We're policymakers. We're supposed to go in and listen to them. We don't go back to DC to be the experts already. We have to understand, we have to get at the table. We have to know what we need to do and address that. And I will tell you, we cannot be in court always under an environmental regulation that again stops all the economy, because Oregon will continue to flail and be in debt like the rest of the country if we get back on track.
So what could voters expect from you on climate if you were elected? I'm hearing that you want to engage more with in industry, or are you talking about the fossil fuel industry?
I'm talking about the industry here in Oregon. I'm talking about the timber industry. I'm endorsed by the American Forest Resource Council because we know that we're not using our resources to the best of their ability because of through the environmental lens of the EPA and NEPA, we end up being in court. Now we've gone from, we have hundreds of thousands of acres that we can either log or graze effectively, replant more trees. We plant 4 to 1 in this state. Gosh, that couldn't be any better than we can do, right? We plant trees, that sequesters the carbon, it keeps the land cool. There are natural ways to be resilient in this state, and it isn't always through one lens. And that's what I want to address. I want to work with our partners across the Natural Resources Committee. Bruce Westerman from Nebraska, I've talked to him a lot because they deal with the same issues. Congressman Cliff Bentz, he's a water expert. He's an attorney. We need to make sure that we're protecting our water sheds. We have to, our irrigation districts, our farmers, our ranchers, drinking water. So our watersheds are important as well. We have to get at the table together. And I just don't want to see a one mandate, one size fits all through the deal be the answer.
Yeah, and there's kind of 2 ways that government can do work on climate change. One is through mandates and the other is through incentives. And there are a slew of incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act for electric vehicles, also for homeowner energy efficiency. And I wonder what you thought about those 2 incentives in particular.
For electric vehicles, well, again, for instance, my girlfriend just bought a story. I don't have an electric vehicle. I've thought about it, but I don't have it. My girlfriend just bought one, quite expensive. Again, $65,000 is quite expensive for anybody to purchase a car. And there was an incentive back, but there was a lot of hoops to jump through. And it ended up costing more to have the electrician come put the plug into her home in order to get that incentive. So, I think that there's some regulatory framework that gets us in spending more money. So we all want to do greater for this country. When we know better, we do better. We work hard at recognizing what's important to this state. It's our state to protect. It's our country to protect. How we get there is where we probably see a difference. And I think if we bring everybody to the table, incentivize homeowners to plant naturally. Don't mandate. Mandates don't work. They scare people. It's unsure. They're not sure if they can afford it. And who pays for all of it? We have to ask ourselves that always. And as mayor, being a filter for that, that was important. What's a good idea? How does it benefit the greatest number of people? And how do we pay for it without breaking the bank? Those are the questions I ask myself when I'm making decisions.
Do you think
Jamie,
the country...
I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Do you think the country is moving urgently enough to cut carbon emissions?
Well, I think it's a global issue, right? We can move as fast as we want, but if we let China decide that they're going to be the dirtiest when they're building and the carbon emissions are going to be great, how do we make up for that? I think those are the questions. We don't ask enough questions. If we're going to still drill and have fossil fuels, we do it cleaner than any other country. We should be doing it instead of relying on other countries and then purchasing that oil. So that none of that makes sense to me, and it doesn't make sense to most people because it costs more money, and then we're reliant. And now we're seeing ourselves in a situation today where, again, to be reliant on Russia, to be reliant on Iran, to be reliant on OPEC, we're going to see availability go down and prices go up, and people will not be able to sustain it in their own pocketbooks if we don't make better decisions. And
I'm sorry, Grant, I interrupted.
I was just going to ask Jamie if you had any response to this line of questioning.
So did you want me to respond to kind of the digs made at me, or just the concept? I mean, going back to your question, I think it was a very important first step. So when it comes to creating climate solutions, essentially, because I don't care what you call it. In rural areas where I live, a lot of folks don't refer to climate change, but everyone knows about wildfire, everyone knows about drought. And so it's a concept that everyone is well aware that we need to deal with. So there's some of those emergency steps of the preparation piece, because it's here and we're having to deal with it. And that's part of the work I'm doing now with the state. Whether it's also building resilient communities, making sure communities who don't typically haven't had access to some of this information. That's part of the work we're doing now to help prepare people. In terms of emergency response, my experience last year in talent really informed some of the improvements I'd like to make sure that the federal government can be a better partner to states and the state emergency system and to local government as well. But the bigger question here is really this trajectory that we're on, and we need to change it because we are essentially, as a globe, following our own nest and creating a real path to destruction. So I believe we need to invest in a clean energy 21st century grid. I think this needs to be done in partnership with unions and others who have felt threatened by some of these conversations. But there's also here in Oregon, we've got a lot of folks really leaning into this. And so I really see Oregon as the opportunity to build up a model for the nation. I mean, the reference to the Green New Deal, my perception of the Green New Deal is it was probably more developed within an urban area, not enough conversations with rural folks. Rural areas are the hardest hit by the climate change and climate impacts, and so have to be part of the solution. But we must do something. And so I think what we need to be looking at is, as part of this renewable energy grid, making sure we have a stable grid, making sure we have redundant systems. We saw what happened in Texas when that was not the case. You know, back when I served on a city council, the city where I was in had its own power utility. And so we worked on these issues and actually transitioned from the city from coal fire to natural gas as a transition fuel. And so utilizing opportunities to be getting cleaner and healthier. But we do, per Helen's question, there is a sense of urgency and we need to move quickly. So there's been a lot of federal resources and incentives provided for the wind farms that we have along the gorge. The solar farms going in. We should also be manufacturing solar panels. We've got some really exciting technology going in terms of storage capacity. And Tualatin is just outside the district, outside the 5th Congressional District, but battery storage is a big part of this as well. Part of my role on OWEB, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, is we're looking at incorporating best practices, working with our rural partners, with farmers and ranchers, to try to incorporate best practices into how we at the local level have positive impacts on reducing those. Yes, it is a global issue, but we all have to do our part for anything to change. And so we're working on those partnerships now. We're also doing a lot more to understand the data behind it and what can have the best impact. So we've got some best practices out there, but making sure we're supporting folks at the local level. And even things like regenerative agriculture. No one cares more, I would argue, than our farmers about the soil. But there's also some best practices that can help make sure they are more successful in protecting their family farms over a long period of time, but also those can serve as carbon sinks as well, with some best practices, working in partnership with extension services. And we have a lot of really great partners here in Oregon. And so at the federal level, the important thing is to figure out what resources are needed and how do we develop those partnerships and work on them. Also things like the High Desert Partnership in Eastern Oregon. It's a national model for working in partnership to address local challenges. And there's federal money going into that right now that's critically important. So more of that support. And there's some really good partnerships in place, but providing those resources, these should not be political issues. You know, wildfire doesn't check party affiliation when it's burning down homes. And we all care about our family farms and don't want to see them go under. So we need to work in partnership and figure out what we can all do sitting around the table to move forward on this. And frankly, this is one of the reasons why I've got such great support here in Central Oregon, because folks, Republicans as well, say, look, you understand the issues, you show up, you're one of us. Of course, we want you to represent us because you understand the steps needed, and then also don't play politics with it. We saw this last year where actually someone who was involved in the Malheur occupation tried to come into Central Oregon and stir up trouble and stir up conflict. And a bunch of us worked behind the scenes, Republicans and Democrats, to help address some of the drought crisis we were seeing, but also prevent it from becoming a political gamesmanship and political grenade. And so I'm really proud of that work, and I'm proud of the partnerships we have here in Central Oregon working on that.
So, Jamie, let me ask you this about clean energy. The Northwest has access to a tremendous source of clean energy through hydropower and our dam system. Would you support? However, there's concerns about how dam construction has decimated salmon populations. Would you support removing the 4 lower Snake River dams?
Yeah, great question. Great follow-up on this one. So just again, to provide some context, salmon here in Oregon, salmon is not just for recreation, it's part of our cultural heritage. It's critical to our commitment to the tribes. It's also part of our food industry. It's part of that foundation. So we must take steps to protect. And I can tell you as a civil engineer, all structures have a shelf life. So the approach I bring to this type of issue, this specific question and others, is to use that analysis of what are the benefits, what are the negatives, and can we mitigate the negatives? That's the environmental planning background and assessment I use when working for a water agency. So those dams, they're of the benefits they provide. We've got to look at transitioning and getting those benefits in other ways. As those dams end their shelf life, if you will, and we know the structure would otherwise fail, we need to move forward to mitigate the impacts they would have, invest in those mitigations, and then also take those dams down. I do think we're seeing that in Southern Oregon, actually, with the dams in Klamath. Those are smaller dams, but PacifiCorp actually, when they went through FERC and were looking at relicensing, they actually decided because of cost, it made more sense for them to take them down. They were hydropower, but they weren't generating that much revenue. For the Snake River dams, I think we need to prepare for it. I think we need to prepare for the transitions that are needed in place to keep our energy grid stable. And again, this is the investment in that renewable energy grid, because we must maintain a stable energy grid. And then also transportation, water storage. A lot of these issues must be addressed. But once we have a solution for those, then I do think we should take those dams down.
Thank you. And Lori, same question for you. Do you believe that we should be breaching the 4 dams on the lower Snake River? And what would you, how would you make that transition if so?
And that's the question, right? We're not ready to make the transition just yet. There's not enough investment or time in order to understand how important they are. Again, I think Jamie just mentioned, how important the agricultural is to the 5th District, and recognizing we have a shortage of water, and we have to make sure that we are able to access that and still protect our natural resources, our salmon, our heritage, Native Americans. This is very important to them as well. That is not a discrepancy, I don't think, in our explanation of identifying the issues. But it's a real concern. The Farm Bill is getting ready to come up. This is something, again, that farmers, ranchers they have best practices, and they're working on all of these elements. I mean, we're endorsed by the Farm Bureau, AgPack, nurseries, cattlemen's, and this is an issue for them as well. They want to be the best stewards of the water. They want to be the best stewards of the land, and we cannot leave them off the table in order to address this, because we're going to see it move forward. I don't think the conversation is going to go away. And so we want to be eyes and ears for them. And how do we get to the best place in order to move forward? It's really as simple as that, bringing everybody to the table. And as mayor, I've done that year after year after year. And they're hard conversations to have, but they're real and they're important. This is our state to protect. I think that we can all recognize that.
Great. Thank you both so much for your time. If you like, you can give real short kind of wrap up statements. And let's see, we started with Laura. So actually, Jamie, how about if you go first this time with just a closing?
Sure. Well, thanks so much for this opportunity to have the conversation. I think this is a time for serious leadership, folks who, someone who can work across the divide, someone who knows the issues on the ground and has actually worked on the ground. I would put forth that I'm that person just based on my experience. Would love to get your endorsement. But I think that the 3 key things here are just serious experienced leadership, someone who's done this work. The other thing is some clear policy differences. I will say there's been some evolution on policy, and then also with regard to talking about the issues here today. If mimicry is the greatest form of flattery, then I do feel extremely flattered on some of the position points that were mentioned today. And then also on accountability. I strongly believe in accountability for taxpayer dollars. And that's something that's been a strong track record. It's one of the reasons why I don't take corporate PAC money. I believe our corporations are an important part of our economy, but I also believe in accountability ultimately to voters. And, my philosophies when I first elected back in 2004 was always, I don't believe in spending public money. I believe in investing it. And so I always have a strong investment argument for any expenditure, public expenditure at any level of government. And I will bring that accountability and seriousness about careful expenditure of our public resources to my role as a Congresswoman.
Thank you. And Lori.
Well, again, thank you for having me here today. It was a pleasure to visit with you both. This is a high profile race for a reason. Oregon's on the map to bring some balance to the state. We've had, one party rule for a very long time in the state and at the congressional level as well, representing Oregon. And I think the best approach to any issue that we can all identify, and I will tell you, identifying them as the economy, inflation is number one. I don't think anybody can deny that we're hurting in this state, and individual families, hardworking families are struggling to put food on the table and gas in their cars. Public safety. We've seen it over and over again. If we don't support our public safety and the rule of law, it breaks down, communities break down, and people are suffering for that as well. And we need to address that and make sure that we fully fund our public safety. And the testament to this is, who can do that? As mayor, as a business owner, as a mom, it was important to address all of these. My great-grandmother didn't speak English. My grandmother had a 6th grade education. I was the first to go to college in my family and graduate. And we have built our business through hard work and sacrifice over the last 18 years. And our one job was to have productive citizens for our future children and really springboard off of who came before us. And that takes hard work. And I'm not ashamed to say that I've worked hard in all aspects of my life. But mayor was one of the greatest jobs because you can really listen to what's on the ground. You see people at the grocery store, you see people at the schoolyard, you see people in the parks. They want their family safe. They want a fair wage job to go to every single day. They want to come home, enjoy the hard work that they've had, and people want to aspire to live the American dream. It is our job as leaders to create that vision, make sure that we can listen and take the voices of Oregon's 5th district and all of Oregon really to DC and say, here's who we are and here's what we want back for the contract that we're making of our tax dollars to say, this is what we need. We have to be that voice, and I have the experience to do so. I look forward to being transparent and coming home and saying, here's what we've done, here's what we can do better, and here's what we can do again. I was named, again, one of the most transparent cities in Oregon for those reasons, because we have to be accountable to the taxpayers. They hiring us, and I look forward to try earning your endorsement. And thank you again for taking the time and sharing this with your viewers.
Thank you so much for your time.